The office was empty, or at least Alexia Summers thought it was. She stood in front of the framed Forbes cover mounted on the wall, Elliot Hawkins, staring back at her with that perfectly composed expression, and she let everything out. Every word she'd swallowed in that conference room, every humiliation she'd smiled through. She told the poster exactly what she thought of him, and then, in one moment of complete and total loss of judgment, she leaned forward and pressed her lips against it. Behind her, a voice cut through the silence. "Interesting way to give feedback, Miss Summers." She turned around. It was him, the real one. Alexia Summers had worked for Elliot Hawkins for exactly 1 year, 2 months, and 11 days. Not that she was counting. She simply had a precise memory. It was one of the reasons she was good at her job, and being good at her job was the one thing in that building she could claim without hesitation. She knew his schedule before he did. She knew which clients required 3 follow-up emails and which required 1 firm call. She knew he took his coffee black, that he despised small talk before 10 in the morning, and that the only time he smiled in a meeting was when someone across the table had already lost. What Elliot Hawkins did not know was that she existed in any meaningful sense. She was furniture, functional, reliable, and completely invisible. That was fine. She had told herself that was fine. She repeated it often enough that most days she believed it. The conference room on the 32nd floor had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city, and on any other morning, Alexia might have noticed the light. That morning, she noticed nothing except the 12 faces seated around the table and the single face at the head of it. Elliot, still and composed in a charcoal suit, watching her present with the particular expression he wore when he had already decided something and was simply waiting for the other person to stop talking. She had worked on the proposal for 3 weeks. Market repositioning for the company's underperforming mid-tier brand. She had pulled the data herself, cross-referenced competitor strategies, built the projections from scratch. She knew every number on every slide. She presented with the kind of controlled confidence that came not from arrogance, but from preparation. And for 11 minutes, the room followed her. Then Elliot spoke. The premise is flawed. His voice was even unhurried. You're assuming the mid-tier segment has room to grow. It doesn't. The data you're referencing is 18 months old. The market moved. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. We're not pursuing this direction. That was it. No further discussion. The board members shifted in their seats and moved on to the next item, as if her 3 weeks had been a minor scheduling inconvenience. Alexia gathered her materials with steady hands and a completely blank face, and she sat back down in her chair along the wall, the assistant's chair, the one slightly removed from the main table, and she did not say a single word for the remaining 40 minutes of that meeting. She was very, very good at not saying words. The office emptied slowly after 8. The cleaning crew came and went. The last of the junior associates filtered out, and the floor settled into that specific late-night quiet that Alexia had come to know well, the hum of the HVAC system, the distant sound of the elevator, the way her own footsteps sounded too loud on the hardwood when no one else was around. She should have gone home. She had told herself twice already that she was leaving. Instead, she stood in front of the framed Forbes cover, mounted on the wall outside Elliot's office, and stared at it. It was a good photograph. Of course it was. Elliot Hawkins photographed well-composed, jaw-direct eyes, the kind of stillness that read as confidence in print and as arrogance in person. The headline beside his face called him one of the most influential executives under 40 in the country. The issue was 2 years old. He had only gotten more influential since. Alexia looked at that photograph for a long moment, and then, because the floor was empty and no one was watching, and she had been swallowing things for 1 year, 2 months, and 11 days, she started talking. You didn't even look at the full report. Her voice came out quieter than she intended, so she spoke again. You dismissed it in 40 seconds. 40 seconds, and you acted like I'd handed you a napkin sketch." She crossed her arms. The photograph said nothing back, which was fine. It was saying about as much as the real version typically did. "Do you know how many times I've stayed past 9 o'clock in this building? Do you have any idea?" She gestured at the framed cover. "Of course you don't. You have no idea I'm even a person. I'm a calendar notification with legs." She was aware on some level that she was talking to a wall. She was also aware that she had crossed some internal threshold, where that fact no longer stopped her. "The worst part," she said, dropping her voice like she was confessing something, "is that I can't even fully hate you. I've tried. It would be so much easier." She looked at the photograph, that jaw, those eyes, the infuriating composure of a man who had never once in her presence looked uncertain about anything. "You're impossible and exhausting, and you make every room harder to breathe in, and somehow that is also—" She stopped herself, said it anyway. "You're also the most compelling person I've ever worked for, and I despise that about you." The silence in the room was total. So total, in fact, that when she leaned forward on some absurd, impulsive instinct, closing the last few inches between herself and the framed cover, she genuinely did not consider that there was any audience for it. She pressed her lips briefly against the glass. It lasted less than 2 seconds. It was the single most irrational thing she had done in recent memory. "Interesting way to give feedback, Miss Summers." The voice came from behind her, low, unhurried, completely unmistakably real. Alexia did not move for a full 3 seconds. Then she turned around. Elliot Hawkins was standing in the doorway of his office jacket, still on a folder in one hand. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not blank, not dismissive. Something closer to the careful attention he gave to problems that had surprised him. There was nothing to say that would make this better. She was aware of that with absolute clarity. Every possible sentence that formed in her mind dissolved immediately upon inspection. So she said, the only honest thing available. "I thought the office was empty." "Clearly." He glanced briefly at the framed cover and back at her. "How long have you been out here?" "Not long." Elliot studied her for a moment. He set the folder down on the edge of the reception desk without looking away from her face. "How much of that was meant for the poster, and how much was meant for me?" "They're the same person," Alexia said before she could stop herself. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Almost. She picked up her bag from the chair beside her, straightened her jacket, and said with as much professionalism as she could locate at that moment, "I'll have my resignation letter on your desk by 9 tomorrow morning." Then she walked toward the elevator and pressed the button and stood there with her back to him, her face burning, willing the doors to open immediately. They did not open immediately. They took 17 excruciating seconds. "Miss Summers." His voice came from exactly where he'd been standing. He hadn't moved. "I won't be accepting a resignation." The elevator arrived. She stepped inside. The doors closed. She spent the entire ride down telling herself that was the last time she would ever set foot on that floor. She was back at her desk by 8:45 the next morning. She had not written the resignation letter. She had opened the document 3 times and stared at it and closed it again, because the honest reason she couldn't write it was the same honest reason she'd been standing in front of that poster in the first place. She didn't actually want to leave. She wanted things to be different, and those were not the same thing. Elliot arrived at 9:02 exactly as he always did. He walked past her desk without stopping. She pulled up his calendar and the morning's briefing documents and said, "You have a call with the Toronto office at 9:30 and a one-on-one with the legal team at 11. The Singapore report is on your desk." Her voice was steady, professional. "Thank you." He said it the way he said it every morning, clipped, functional, already moving. Except that at the door to his office he stopped. He didn't turn around. "The mid-tier proposal. Leave the full version on my desk. I'll read it today. Alexia looked up from her screen. He was already inside his office door, closed behind him. She stared at the door for a moment, then looked back at her monitor. On the surface, it was a small thing, a routine request. But Elliot Hawkins did not